Well, here's the book. It's titled The Devil We Know, Dealing with the New Iranian Superpower. New York Times bestseller. The author is Robert Baer, who joins us this morning live from Berkeley, California. And Mr. Baer is a former CIA operative. And why'd you pick this title? First off, Mr. Baer, The Devil We Know. What are you saying here?
The implication is that we actually know Iran very well. We've had a strained relationship, to put it nicely, over the years. But what I'm trying to say, it's a predictable country. It's a country that's fallen a revolutionary arc, if you like. Was very violent in '79, continued through the '80s, and then became a much more mature power. It's sort of Iran's thermidor. So by 1996, it was no longer conducting terrorism against the United States. So for the last 13 years now, we've had fairly even relations with Iran.
You use the word superpower as well in that cover, dealing with the new Iranian superpower. Put that word in perspective here.
It's a word, it's like, I'll be frank with you, the publisher picked it. I would prefer hegemon in the Persian Gulf, simply by the fact that it can cut off oil supplies. Iran can mine the Gulf, Iran can rocket Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, Iran can take off 40% of world's traded oil within minutes. And in that sense, it could take control of the Persian Gulf. 90% of the Persian Gulf is Shia, 12 are Shia, which in one form or another answers to Iran. So Iran is the only, large power in the Gulf. If we were to withdraw one day, Iran would fill the vacuum.
Taking it a step deeper, you write in the prologue, page 4, Robert Baer, scratch away the veneer of Islam, and what you find in an Iranian is old-fashioned nationalism, a deep, abiding defiance of colonialism. Keep scratching, and what you find at the bottom of Iran's soul is a newfound taste for empire. Speak more to what this country is looking to achieve.
I think in terms of hegemony, it wants to control. It wants to make sure that the countries on its border answer to Tehran in one way or another, not by occupation, but what they want to do is have Afghanistan, Iraq, Central Asia, and the Arab countries in one way or another deferring to Tehran on important national security issues. And as they would. I mean, just as we would like to have Ottawa defer to us or Mexico defer to us, in the same way, Iran would like the same. Occupation is a bad word, or empire is a bad word, because it doesn't really apply. They just wanted predominance of influence in that region.
Phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for Robert Baer, who's out in Berkeley, California. We're talking about Iran, and there are lines for Republicans, Democrats, and independents. We'll start taking your calls in just a moment. Robert Baer, remind us of your career with CIA to the extent you can. How many years? Where were you? And then spin it off into what you actually saw in Iran, because you have spent considerable time there.
I spent 21 years in the CIA, almost all of it in the Middle East. The CIA put me through Arabic. 2 years of it. I served in Levant. I served in Lebanon during the worst years. Morocco, Syria, Lebanon. Where else? I've been to Iran on visits before the revolution, and most recently was Morocco, and I was in France for a while where I covered the Middle East. So it's my entire career has been in the Middle East. I resigned from the CIA in December 1997. I was involved in an aborted coup in Iraq in March 1995, and I just left to do other things, mainly to write.
And when you look at the Iranians themselves, before we get to calls, here's a passage from the book. It's a country of nuances, you write. Americans see Iran's president and mullahs as relics from a dark age, when in reality they're a driving force behind Iran's modernization. Speak more to that, the leadership, especially the religious leadership, and the people.
Well, you look at the religious leadership today after I wrote the book, and they are truly the opposition to Khamenei, the supreme leader. I mean, they are the ones. Qom now is the center of opposition. You look at Rafsanjani, who's come out for democracy in their terms. Several other mullahs have condemned the violence in Tehran. And so you see it's much more nuanced society. We tend to look at Ayatollah Khomeini, and that's where our images of Iran rest, is in this firebrand, spreading revolution, creating a religious state. But Iran has matured. It's a changed country. And what I try to do in the book is that's the backdrop for the book. But on the other hand, the real story in my book is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I served on the periphery of Iran, not in Tehran. So what I know is Iran's edge of expansion through the Middle East, and who these people are in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, because they're very important. They are taking key positions right now. The new Minister of Defense nominated is from the Revolutionary Guard Corps. He has a long, violent history. On the other hand, he is a man who has abandoned violence, as far as we can see, in terms of foreign expansion. And anyhow, that's, you know, there is theory that you can see empires better from the periphery. I mean, I'm not in a position to argue that, but the fact is I was on Iran's periphery, and that's the aperture which I look through.
First call for Robert Baer out in California, St. Clair Shores, Michigan. Robert, you're on the Republican line. Hi, Robert.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Mr. Baer. How are you?
Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. By the way, my brother-in-law is currently working for your former employer. I'm very curious about Iran. I find them rather fascinating, as I do most of the Middle East. I picked up a textbook, basically, it was a series, and I read the history of Iran as best I could. It's very complicated, and I noticed that in their history, I was looking for, the Bush administration was constantly saying that they were a threat to virtually everybody, and I couldn't understand. It didn't seem right to me, and so I read this book, and there were moments in history. Now, that's history, and today's today. I understand that. But their history of the people, they're very cultured and very intelligent. And they are, they're not a terribly warlike people. They have been under assault by the Russians and the Brits and the Americans and everybody else. And it seems to me that they are the most powerful country in the Middle East, and they have some right to exert their not dominate, but they have, their presence. And the one more thing I'll add that I looked up on the website of the Energy Department is that they have a great deal of natural gas, and why they're developing nuclear energy at all is a mystery to me. And I'll just leave you open for some comment, perhaps.
Thanks, Robert Baer, out in Berkeley.
That poses a couple questions for me, and one is you have to look at, first of all, from the Iranian perspective. It's got 2 American armies on 2 of its borders, Afghanistan and Iraq. In 2003. When we invaded Iraq, we were talking about Iran being, part of the axis of evil. The implication was that we might attack Tehran next. So we fed Iranian paranoia at that point. Iran was invaded by Russia in '46. There was the Mossadegh coup in '53. The fact is, I've read the Mossadegh files. We had a limited role in the overthrow of the prime minister in '53. Nonetheless, the Iranians tend to be paranoid about this subject, and they're paranoid right now because we're still talking about bombing Iran. So when you see the Iranians acting irrationally, they do have a reason for it. Now, as for the nuclear energy, what they would like to do, they have a very large population, 70 million. Their oil fields are depleted. A lot of them are. What they would like to do is use that remaining oil to sell on international markets and domestically use nuclear energy. Now, that doesn't mean to say they're not developing a nuclear weapon, which they probably will someday, but there is a reason that they want these nuclear reactors, and it's a very good reason. Now, as far as not opening them up for inspections, what they're saying is, well, if the Israelis don't open up their nuclear facilities, why should we? Now, we would have a ready answer for that because we don't trust you. But, I mean, it's not one that the Iranians can accept. They look at the certain fairness doctrine on their side, and they're saying, fine, if everybody wants to open up their facilities, we will too. It's not going to happen, but that's the dilemma we face as we try to go into negotiations with Iran.
Next call for our guest, New York City. B is on the Democrats' line. Hi there.
Hi there. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Baer, do you think that the policy will be successful in improving relationships with Iran as long as the press in this country, especially the white male press, mostly from Irish American press, is so concentrated on, because of some kind of inadequacy, I guess, that they're feeling, on bringing down Barack Obama, challenging him, than they are in improving what is greater for America.
Thanks. Mr. Baer, before answering the question, explain, in your view, what is the policy right now, the U.S. policy toward Iran? How can you describe it?
Well, you know, the intelligence community has on the books a national intelligence estimate that says that Iran stopped making a bomb in 2003. That has not changed since 2000, the last 6 years. On the political side, there is a belief that Iran is moving ahead with a bomb, and B is absolutely right. You see this in the press. They're going to have a bomb in a year. They're going to have a bomb in 6 months. Frankly, since I've been in the CIA since 1980, we've predicted every 4 years there's going to be a bomb, and there never obviously has been one. So I don't know where that stands in terms of the intelligence community. They haven't made that public yet. I don't think Iran wants a bomb particularly right now. It's got other issues to deal with. First, internally, it has to worry about Iraq as well as Afghanistan, 20 years maybe. But B is absolutely right. The press in this country is absolutely, and press is a big word, but I see a tendency for people dealing with the Middle East that we have to do something about this regime in Iran, about Ahmadinejad. The line now is he's not a legitimate president of Iran. He's an apocalyptic Shia. He's going to attack Israel. We have to do something. It's fairly shallow analysis, obviously, because Iran is much more complicated than that. But Iran is, in a sense, if I can put it this way, a third rail of American politics. You know, I could write a book about Peru, anything in the world, and people would completely ignore it. But when you write about Iran, it sends hackles up people's back.
Look at the book, The Devil We Know, Dealing with the New Iranian Superpower. The author is Robert Baer, ex-CIA. He is out in Berkeley, California this early morning for him. Raleigh, North Carolina. Lewis, you're on the independent line.
Hi,
Lewis.
thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Just wanted to say, I really don't know why everyone is so threatened by Iran. I feel like they're a country that's heading in the right direction. I think this is just a bunch of propaganda to make them seem like an evil superpower.
You know, I totally agree. Well, one, let's get right to the issue. Can we afford to go to war with Iran? And the answer is no. If we think that we're going to bomb their nuclear facilities in a tactical strike, and that's going to be the end of it, that's completely misunderstanding the country of Iran. It will respond. It will respond against the oil. It will respond in the Persian Gulf. It will respond against our troops in Iraq. The Chief of Staff, Joint Chiefs of Staff has said very clearly there will be consequences to an attack on Iran. Our military is saying, wait, hold on. Let's not make this a political issue. Let's consider the military consequences of an attack, and Joint Chiefs of Staff is absolutely right.
What did the Israelis think about that point that you just made? We had an earlier caller mention that there are elements there that are very committed to going to war. What's your take of the Israeli approach?
Oh, I think they absolutely are, but they have a different experience with Iran. I mean, Iran looks at Israel as beyond the international pale, if you like. In 2006, they fought a war against Israel, which psychologically was devastating for Israel. They were unable to move Hezbollah back from the border. They lost a lot of troops. They lost a Corvette, was hit by rockets they didn't even know Hezbollah had. They accuse Iran. And the Israeli point of view is it is an existential threat to Israel. But the point is that if we go to war with Iran, we're going to pay the price, not Israel. And this is what this president is going to face this fall.
There's a Twitter message here as well, Mr. Baer. Can you comment on how Bush and Obama attempting to spend millions, or billions they write, to defend Europe from an imaginary Iran threat? Connect the last administration, this one, and the approach regarding Europe and Iran.
You know, yes, it is a problem. But it's based on the premise that the Iranians are irrational. Iran does have rockets that can hit Europe now. One day, presumably, they could put a nuclear weapon on this. But what the assumption is that Iran is an irrational power that doesn't care about its survival. I would argue that it's acted very rationally over the last few years. In fact, I would say it's acted more rationally than we have. But that's part of the debate that is, you can't convince people of this, or people have already made up their minds in this case.
Next call, Los Angeles. James on the Republican line for Robert Baer. Good morning. LA, you there?
Yep.
Let's try Boston. Boston, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead, sir.
Shortly after 9/11, Iran reached out to the United States, and they were going to help the United States, but it was vetoed by Israeli interests within the United States administration. Until the Congress, which is bought and paid for by the Israeli lobby, before these people are expunged, there's not going to be any movement forward for peace in that part of the world. And I think that's mighty obvious. Thanks.
Robert Baer, any thoughts?
I'd like to address one point. Look, when we went into Afghanistan in October 2001, there was a general called there Fahim. He's still in Afghan politics. He is, I wouldn't call him an Iranian asset, but he certainly answers to Tehran in many ways. He's a Tajik. He speaks Persian. It was his troops that we marched into Kabul with, the Special Forces and the CIA, and that was thanks to a green light from Tehran. So Iran was completely on our side when we got rid of the Taliban in 2001, but Iran remained, because of Washington politics, as part of the axis of evil. This is, again, goes back in the Middle East. People, it seems to me, can't look at this rationally and just calculate in pure power terms. This is a very emotional issue, Iran, because what for Israelis and pro-Israel lobbies in this country is that Iran is an existential threat and that we were not going to have a second Holocaust. And this is a message that addresses many Americans' emotions and sentiments, as well as politics in Washington. You know, it's a tough issue to deal with. And I do feel sympathy for this White House. It simply cannot say, we're going to give this 5 more years and see what happens, or we're going to wait until they test a nuclear bomb and then we'll deal with it. There is a movement on the Hill to impose an embargo on gasoline, other embargoes which very well could touch off a war.
Robert Baer, put in perspective the recent uprisings in Iran following the election, all that video that we saw of the people protesting, the reports of deaths and beatings and the like. When you saw that, and as you look back these weeks later, what do you take of it?
A couple of things. I think it's interesting that nobody predicted it in this country. And even in Iran, they didn't really predict it. This was spontaneous. It's frustration with the economy. It's a belief that the supreme leader, Khamenei, the Ayatollah, who truly controls the country rather than Ahmadinejad, is illegitimate. He does not have the credentials of an Ayatollah. There's chafing among the other mullahs. He's also a dictator in many senses, and what we're seeing is the mullahs are revolting again. We're seeing a revival of the '79 revolution. You know, Iran is a budding democracy, if you like. It's a very odd one for us. This is a good sign, and I think it's going to check this regime, and it's going to check Khamenei. Is Iran in a pre-revolutionary state? I just don't know the country that well enough, and I haven't seen analysts in this country that do either.
Help us understand the economy in Iran a little bit better. You mentioned the oil fields are depleting a bit, but how else is the economy put together, and what are the most severe problems there right now?
Subsidizing flour, gasoline, state industries that draw money, a young population, high unemployment, high inflation. Iranians can't marry because they don't have a place to live. Enormous frustration with the young people. They hate the regime, and they go between apathy and wanting to do something about it. When they came out in the streets, you know, the apathy just melted away when the elections were apparently stolen. We don't know they were stolen. I presume they were, but they came out on the streets spontaneously. The question is, where does it go from here? Rafsanjani, a very important figure in Iran, has come out in support of the regime. This was a turnaround for him, 180 degrees, which tells me that Ahmadinejad, the president, and Khamenei have consolidated power. And they're starting to point people from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which, we could have the same situation for the next 10 years.
Next call from Daniel on the independent line, who's in Ishpeming, Michigan. Good morning.
Hey, you got the name right. The reason I voted for Obama was in like a symbolic way, his name. I was wondering what the effect of the people in Iran of Obama's being our president now.
Mr. Baer.
I think the people in Iran are very realistic. They're on the internet. They read our newspapers. They can analyze the situation. They watch our actions rather than Obama. I think they had a lot of hope when Obama came in. I think they understand at the same time there's a gridlock in Washington. Obama inherited what I consider a mess. Private interests, lobbying groups. He can't get his health bill through right now because of lobbying groups, and the same with national security interests. So the Iranians understand this, and what they're waiting to do is to see where negotiations go, what we do in Iraq. With the violence there, are we going to leave now, or are we going to stay longer? If we stay longer, this is going to aggravate our relations with Iran. Same way with Afghanistan. If we fail there and add more troops, it's going to make them more paranoid. So they're waiting for things to develop. They're looking for a real change.
You mentioned Iraq, Mr. Baer. What is Iran's relationship right now with that country, its interest in Iraq, if you can speak to that?
I think they would like to see, well, I mean, the Shia do control, the sect is the same sect as in Tehran. They do control Baghdad now, and you have the prime minister is a Shia. He's got uneven relations with Tehran. But what they're pushing Maliki, the prime minister of Iraq, to do is, for instance, to force out the Iranian dissidents who've been living there for years, and which they've done. It's called the MEK. They raided the camp. What they would like to see in Iraq is stability, naturally. They do not want to see a civil war there because it's on their border. The chances of a civil war spilling into Iran are pretty good, and they know that. They would like to see the Americans leave a quiet Iraq where they would have a predominance of influence, especially in the Shia South. Right now, there's no indication that they intend to take this Shia government in Baghdad and use it as a springboard to go after the Arab countries in the Gulf. But the Arab countries are certainly worried about that, and only time will tell.
Fayetteville, North Carolina is on the line now. Barry, Democrat. Hi there.
Hi. I was just wanting to I was just thinking anyways, and I was wanting to say, I was wondering how we compare, or how we did compare, say, a couple years ago, to how we do compare now. And that's probably the way that we're viewed by Iran, and the way that our media, no matter who's in presidency, it's always controlled by corporations, because Obama isn't even able to do anything right now, and the media is doing everything against him. But yet, how are we viewed by Iran when our president is a what do you call a floundering duck?
Robert Baer.
It looks that way to me. I mean, I can't resist mentioning something about Blackwater, the security company that was hired by the CIA to do assassinations. I mean, it does look like that Washington is controlled by corporate interests. I mean, obviously it's more complicated than that, but Washington is a mess, and so is Congress, and so are the lobbying groups. And even if Obama could sit down and say, all right, and say to Hillary Clinton, go to Tehran, figure out what we can do, I don't think he would survive it politically. I mean, my attitude is send her to Tehran, find out what they want, see what we can do. If we can't, she can come back, and we just reassess our policy at that point. But I don't think he can do that. I think these issues are too emotional for lobbying groups in Washington, for a vast majority of Americans, and he's pretty much stuck with the last administration's politics.
Our guest spent many years at CIA. He's also author of other books besides the one we're talking about today. One of them is titled Sleeping with the Devil. Remind us, Mr. Baer, what that book's about?
It's about Saudi Arabia, and I am forbidden from ever going to Saudi Arabia again. It was corruption in the royal family in Saudi Arabia, and what I talk about in that book is really a dysfunctional government that can't last forever. I mean, If the price of oil stays high, it will last many more years. If oil should fall to a very low level, the government will collapse. It's that easy. But it was an attack on. I mean, look, I speak Arabic. I spent 21 years in the Middle East. I have a lot of Arab. In fact, most of my friends are still Arab. But I have a real problem with the Saudi royal regime because it is corrupt, it's dishonest, and it is not going to help us in the long term.
You also wrote See No Evil, which we know is the basis for the film Syriana. George Clooney played your character. Tell us more about that and your reflections on that work.
Hollywood? It makes the Middle East look simple. I wrote this book, and it was before it was actually published. I got a call from Warner Brothers and said, "Do you want to make it into a movie?" And I thought that was a joke, and I said yes. And the movie came about very quickly, and I traveled with the director for 2 months in the Middle East, and we sat down in a cafe in Paris, and he says, your book doesn't really a good basis for a movie, so what's the storyline here? And I told him it's when I got out of the CIA, the old world would not go away, and we were offered a chance, my wife and I, to assassinate somebody, which we obviously said no, and came home from the Middle East, and he said, I like that. He says, a guy in the CIA gets out with no retirement, nothing, no real future, and he's tempted to stay in this work, and he says no, and he ends up in a bad way. The movie was very, very complicated. When they first sent me the script, I didn't understand a thing, but it apparently worked. It did well, and it was a new world for me.
Next call for Robert Baer, who'll be with us for about 25, 30 more minutes. Tupelo, Mississippi, Republican caller named Tim.
Hello, am I on the air?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, C-SPAN, for having the guest on, balancing everything out a little bit there with a liberal. But I did want to ask him about Ahmadinejad's remarks about the destruction of Israel, wiping Israel off the map, and then some of the things that Ahmadinejad has said regarding the denial of the Holocaust. I have just a quick comment and I'll hang up. I think the folks over there speak Farsi, and if you could tell us whether or not he actually said these things, or did he say those things literally, or did the press mistranslate or anything like that? And the last question I've got is, do you think the United States exerted any influence indirectly in supporting some of the anti-Ahmadinejad parties in the last election?
Thanks. Mr. Baer.
That's a good question, because he did say that, and I should add that recently the Chief of Staff of the Iranian Army wrote a letter to the hidden imam. This is a man that's disappeared, supposedly, in the canons of Shia Islam. He disappeared in Iraq, but in Iran, in the Jamkaran well, people dropped notes down to him at the bottom of the well. And the Chief of Staff recently wrote this man a letter who disappeared in the 9th century. So you have these flourishes of end times in Iranian political speech. Now, whether they're serious or not, I can't tell you, but what we have to do is look at the record with Iran, and especially look at Iraq. Iran could have caused us major problems in Iraq. It could have unleashed attacks on our supply line. It could have kidnapped American soldiers, and I could go on and on. It didn't. It does have at its heart a sense of survival, and I think that's what really we're seeing in Iran. This could change overnight, but again, if we go into Iran, it's another preemptive war. We don't really know who we're fighting or what we're fighting for. We're basing a war on Iran on our assumptions and not necessarily reality.
How much does this country know, do you suspect, especially as former CIA, the government know about the inner workings of Iran? How difficult is the country to penetrate and learn about in that sense?
Oh, it's virtually impossible to know about Iran. I mean, look, the CIA does well when it's on the ground in a country, just as the military does in Iraq. We know so much more about Iraq, obviously, than we went in 2003, is that we need embassies, we need academics, we need journals, we need open source reporting, we need the New York Times, we need all these things, but in order to do that, you have to be in the country. Otherwise, what you're left with, in many cases, is exiles that come out, or defectors, as we call them, who will tell you a story, and the problem is they all have a bias, and they have a motivation for telling you things, and we're often misled. I mean, this has recurred over history with the Russian Revolution, with Vietnam, and so forth. And it's very, very difficult. The CIA was surprised by the demonstrations after the 12 June elections. They don't have people in country. It's too dangerous to send them there. A lot of what we deal with in Iran is guesswork. And to go back and answer one question, we were not behind the 12 June demonstrations. That was entirely internal, spontaneous.
On the flip side here is a Twitter message, Mr. Baer. Has there been evidence of infiltration of Iranian intelligence personnel into U.S. intelligence operations?
Well, there's been one case of a woman who worked for the CIA and the FBI. She went between both, who was supposedly searching computers for Hezbollah, which we assume goes back to Iran. There's not much evidence of it, that they really care. When I was in the CIA, the Iranian intelligence people avoided us like the plague. I mean, you'd go to a party and you know who they were, and as soon as you walked toward them, they would head for the exit. So they weren't really after us. They didn't want to know about us. They tend, Iranian intelligence, to use through surrogates. So if they have, sources in this country, they're either completely clandestine, sabotage networks we don't know about, maybe coming up from South America, or they're just sort of, casual contacts.
Next call for our guest, Frederick, Maryland. Ibrahim, independent caller. Hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
Last week, August 19, was the 56th anniversary of the coup in Iran that removed democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh as a prime minister. And it was entirely or mostly the job of CIA. Mr. Baer says CIA had only a minor role in it. But my point is, we still talk about something that happened 56 years ago. And most likely we'll be talking about it 56 years from now, because this is a very significant event. It was the greatest calamity that befell Iranian nation. And people in Iran have great resentment about what happened, because at that day, their democracy died. And America to be blamed practically entirely, even though British, of course, were involved. And of course, there were also Iranian agents and traitors who collaborated. In Mr. Baer's book, he actually makes the coup d'etat very, insignificant and not a big deal, and says that the hostage taken in Iran by the student during the revolution actually overcompensated what the damage was done by the America to Iran, which I think is a very disproportionate sense, in this area. So I like to invite Mr. Baer to look at MohammadMossadegh.com and learn about the depth of resentment and anger and disappointment, because Americans at the time really thought America was for liberty and freedom and independence of the small nations. So really they feel very betrayed by it, and they're not going to trust it unless America does something.
Let's hear from our guest out in Berkeley, Robert Baer.
Well, I certainly see that point of view. If we go back and look at the record of the Mossadegh coup, which has been published in the New York Times, you'll see that British Petroleum, the British Secret Service, the ambassador, the Shah himself, and even General Schwarzkopf's father, who was in the New Jersey State Police, were part of this coup. So, I mean, we can spread responsibility. But the point is that symbolically, the CIA was behind it. Now, if you're an Iranian and a foreign government comes in and changes your prime minister, who was popular at the time, no doubt about it, was talking about nationalizing oil resources in Iran, it's a humiliation. It's a humiliation not easily forgotten. Just as in 1979, Iran humiliated the United States by holding its diplomats in Tehran. The rescue mission was another humiliation. It was a significant check to American power. It probably contributed to the defeat of Carter in a large sense. So there was two humiliations here. But the Iranians have reason to be paranoid about foreigners, either Russia or the United States or Saudi Arabia. Right now, you have Sunni extremist groups on its edge which are in touch with the American government. And there's one of them called Jundal out of Pakistan, which is setting off car bombs and killing police officers. If you're Tehran in a position, you know, now in a time of volatility, political volatility, you are going to be looking to the outside. And yes, the United States does need to provide quid pro quos for future cooperation. It simply cannot put Iran in the corner and say, do what we want or else. Because on the streets of Tehran, people are still mistrustful of the United States, even the so-called Democrats, the Green Revolution. Mousavi, former prime minister, is not a friend of the United States. He mistrusts the United States as well. So there's a lot of bad blood to overcome. And yes, the Mossadegh coup is very important for Iranians. And we're going to have, when we go to Tehran one day, and I hope we do, we're going to have to treat Tehran as equals and not as a third world power.
More of your calls in just a moment, but Robert Baer, wanted to get your thoughts on the CIA story that's making news this weekend in the papers. Here's the Philadelphia Inquirer. A report coming out this week, internal report at CIA, says that the agency used a gun, a power drill to threaten detainees. They staged a mock execution. As you know, this type of story generates a lot of buzz here in town. What's your take on that?
Oh, I think it's outrageous. I mean, look, I was investigated for attempting to kill Saddam Hussein. I've had the FBI yellow tape my office, you know, and on and on, and I know what's happening internally, and I feel bad about the morale. But the question is, we cannot have the CIA above the law. You can't. The president is wrong. You just say we can't move on. If crimes were committed, if people were killed, if people were tortured, and it's just not the Justice Department memos that allowed this to happen. It's the people that were killed. It's the mock executions which are against the law. There has to be some accounting for this. Otherwise, it's going to dribble out for the next 20 years, and it's going to be much worse. Now, do you do it through a special prosecutor? Do you do it through a bipartisan commission? How do you do it? I don't know. But you do need an accounting for this.
Next call, Killington, Vermont. Jim, Democrat. Hi there. You're on with Robert Baer.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you. I'm reading from an article that appeared in the Middle East Forum in covering post-election Iran, written by an Ali Al-Fani, who's a visiting research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a doctoral candidate in the civil-military relations in Iran, with a focus on the role of the Revolutionary Guard. And he says in this article, and I'm quoting all of this, that he contends that Iran is not in danger of collapse. Rather, it will emerge from its present convulsions a changed nation, most likely for the worse. He argued that the election fraud and riots that Iran is currently experiencing are the result of militarization that Iran has been undergoing since 1997, when the Ayatollah expanded the powers of the Revolutionary Guard in order to prevent reform. And he says that the possibility that the Guard will successfully quash the democratic movement, and Iran will transform into a military dictatorship, and that the transparency of the fraud incited the democratic forces to action, thus giving the Guard an excuse to seize power. And he points out that the president of Iran and most of the cabinet and majority of the Iranian parliament are former Guardsmen. And Al-Fani concluded by arguing that the West should unequivocally treat Iran as a growing threat. In particular, he called on America to take a strong anti-Revolutionary Guard stance and to pursue a policy of containment. It's especially important that the United States work to forge an international consensus against the Iranian regime in order to prevent the Islamic Republic from playing the major world powers against each other. Your comments, please, sir.
Look, the first half, you couldn't be more right. There's been a military takeover since 12 June. The Revolutionary Guard Corps is in control of most of the important ministries in Tehran, the power ministries, as we call them, Ministry of Intelligence. The new defense minister is from the Guards, Vahidi. He's got a very bad reputation. He's been accused of blowing up the Israeli center in Argentina. These guys are in fact, this is one of the theses of my books, is these guys are very dangerous, very competent, and they don't play around. There has been a military takeover in Iran. Now the question is, when you come to the word containment, do you want to provoke the Revolutionary Guard into reacting in Iraq, in Afghanistan, or the rest of the Gulf? Or do you find out what they want first? I think that they've acted fairly rational in the sense that they've set out to do something, like in Lebanon with Hezbollah and fighting the Israelis, and got it done. They've had the sense to back off, for instance, in Gaza and Egypt, most recently. They were supplying rockets. Hamas has stood down for further confrontation from Israel. So they are a very capable group, very intelligent, very violent, ruthless. But in getting rid of them, we need to get rid of the regime in Iran. And that's the question we have to ask. What the thing we do not want to do is lie to ourselves in Washington, which Washington is so easily to do, and that is hit the nuclear facilities or hit a couple Pasdaran camps and think it's finished, because it will not be finished. We're talking about something that looked very much like World War III in the Gulf.
Twitter message regarding the military capabilities, Robert Baer. Mr. Baer, they write, what are the capabilities of the Iranian military forces? How large, they want to know, is the Army and the Navy? What are they capable of?
Well, what they're capable, they have a large reserve element, and they've got the military, but you're looking at the Revolutionary Guards, which is about 250,000, and that's really sort of the elite forces. They control the rocket forces. They are the ones that have hidden batteries along the Gulf. And they very much have a deterrence doctrine, and that is, right now, let's go back to a conflict with Iran. They're saying, if you bomb our nuclear facilities, we're going to take out Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq, Ras Tanur, the major facilities. We're going to take off, we're going to drive the price of oil up to $500 a barrel, if you like. I don't know what it's going to go to in an event of a war, but it would be very high. It would be very costly for us. The Revolutionary Guard Corps has a guerrilla capability all through the Gulf. It's got these little small, these small boats which can do serious damage to our fleet. Our fleet has done exercises. If you use suicide bombers with carrier group, if we attacked Iran, we would have to use months of bombardment in advance. Again, I say we don't know where we would see the reaction. It could be in Central Asia, the Gulf. It could be in Europe. So what they're doing is it's a relatively small force, but it's got this asymmetrical warfare capability, which worries our military.
And the influence of Iran on areas around there. We've heard so much about the situation in Lebanon and proxies that you even refer to in your book. Can you connect the dots with all of that?
Well, the Iranians, I mean, on one level, they need plausible deniability. They can say, well, Hezbollah is an independent group, and it is in a sense, but, if Hezbollah attacks Israel, Iran says, well, it's not us. We're fine, we arm them, but we can't really control them, and that's up for debate. The same with supplying weapons to Hamas and things it's doing in Egypt and Jordan and the rest of it. What's very unclear is how much influence Iran has through the Shia population in the Arab world. The 12 are Shia, especially in Saudi Arabia. You look at the map, or Bahrain, which is 70% Shia. The Iranians could march into Bahrain in a couple hours and take the country, but could they cause a revolution in Bahrain with 70% Shia? That terrifies the Arabs. They could. Or even Dubai is largely a Shia principality. How far could they go? Could they disrupt the Gulf? Yes, absolutely. And this is what had the Arabs terrified. And the Arabs are terrified that we're going to leave Iraq, we're going to leave this a gaping wound, and there's going to be some sort of domino effect which is going to go through the Gulf. It does scare people in the Middle East, Iran.
Another tweet, Mr. Baer, about the military. What nations, this viewer wants to know, what nations are considered Iranian military allies? What aid would they provide in the case of a U.S. or Israeli-led strike? Speak to the military part of it, but speak further to friends that Iran may have around the world.
Well, Syria is pretty much hostage to Iran in the sense that Hezbollah is such an important element of Syrian policy. And, remember that Damascus is the client of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not the client of Damascus. The Syrian regime is a bit shaky. It can't simply say we're going to cut off aid to Hezbollah, we're going to stop arms from coming to Hezbollah, because then they will be looked at as pro-Israeli. So you've got Syria, you've got the Palestinians, who are, there's a whole large parts of them that answer to Tehran in many ways, need their aid, need their political backing. You have the Shia in Iraq, and you have the Shia in Afghanistan, as well as groups in Herat. So you're looking at, again, on the periphery, and then you have Bahrain, as I said, 70% Shia. They don't have particularly a lot of allies, and that's why they use asymmetrical warfare, the ability to cause problems, the ability to make a war against Iran too expensive. What they would like to do is change the, I mean, look, the Iranian revolutionaries, the ones that still revolutionaries at heart, would like to change the government in Saudi Arabia. Now the question is, do they have the upper hand, or is Tehran more pragmatic and more looking at its own survival?
10 minutes left with our guest, Robert Baer, who's in Berkeley, California. By the way, what else are you doing in Berkeley these days?
I write for Time Magazine, and I'm writing a book with my wife, who used to work for the CIA. And it's two voices. It's interesting because you talk about each other. It's sort of an experiment, but the publisher bought it.
Let's hear from Empire, Alabama now. Sandra, independent caller. Hi.
Thank you. I enjoyed the talk this morning, but I have a couple of questions. I'd like to know what is your opinion on Iran and Iraq maybe combining in the future, and the land of Babylon that used to be coming back into existence, and along with the other lands that go with it. And also, seems like eschatology says that's going to happen in the last days toward the times of Jacob's trouble. And I want to know what you think America's place will be. Will they just get further and further back and just decline and not be in the war? Will they give up? And will Russia and China join in with Iran, Iraq, in coming against Israel?
Thanks. Mr. Baer.
There's two interesting aspects to that. One is, if you look at it in a fantastical way of looking at the world, is if you had an alliance, I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but it's not impossible, between Iran and Israel, bookending the Middle East would be some sort of ideal balance of power situation. We would serve our interests. Now what we're seeing is in Afghanistan and Iraq is the United States. We cannot stay in those countries forever. We're going to run out of money. We can't afford an empire in the Middle East. It would just go on. It would break us, bankrupt us. The Chinese are going to stop lending us money. The Americans are already tired of Afghanistan. 51% of Americans, I believe, want out sooner rather than later. We're going to have to leave Iraq. And what's going to fill the vacuum is China and Russia. Iran, with Russian advanced weapons or Chinese weapons, would be a very formidable power in the Middle East, especially with a retreating United States. 65% of the world's proven reserves are in the Gulf. If that somehow should fall under Iran and Russia's control, or China, it will eclipse the United States, and there's very little we can do for Israel at that point.
Next call, Miami, Florida. John, Republican line. You're on with Robert Baer.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Baer, thank you for your service to our country. I really do appreciate that. Just two quick things. One, I was a younger person. I was about 10 years old when we experienced this first Iranian revolution, so I remember that from a different perspective. So I'm wondering, that was set up on the basis and control and power of a bunch of young students and young clergy and religious people who wanted to change in their country. Now the same thing is happening, and those same revolutionaries from before are kind of pushing this away. So I'm wondering, is there some way that these new revolutionaries might be able to take power? And secondly, we mentioned South America a few times. So I'm wondering, is there any threat to us that you know of from South America? Instead of just Iran and Iraq.
Let me answer the last part first, and that is, there is indication, as we know, that Hezbollah and Iran have operated in South America. Let's take the worst case scenario. Could Iran cause problems in the United States? And I'd say yes. Let's take a scenario, it's probably never going to happen, but the United States and Iran are in some sort of worsening confrontation, and an Iranian surrogate setting off a car bomb in New York City brings down a building, somehow they frame another country. It could, terrorism is still on us. Another attack could, push this country in a completely different direction the way it's going now. Yes, there is a threat from Iran in South America. Now, the Democrats, I use that word loosely, in Iran, do want to get rid of Khamenei. He is illegitimate. He is not truly an Ayatollah. He's an old man. He's increasingly controlled by his son, who's not particularly popular. Khomeini's supporters from the old days would like to get rid of him, and that's Mousavi, Karoubi, as we've seen, he ran for the presidency this time. And they are a very potent force. If this regime, Tehran, oversteps itself and goes against the mullahs and Qom and the more democratic elements, there could be a reaction and they could withdraw support from Khamenei. So if tomorrow morning there was another movement in Iran, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, I'd like to say there's something we could do to help the Democrats in Iran, but I don't think there is. The farther we stay away from Iran, the less we say about it, the more we let them solve their own problems, the better off they're going to be, and we will too.
Robert Baer, in our remaining few minutes, wanted you to wrap things up as we look toward the epilogue of the book. You do lay out three broad options. You've spoken to them a little bit, but wrap up your thoughts if you could. You talk about three broad options here. One of them is possibly containing Iran. One of them is to provoke a Sunni-Shia civil war, and the other is to settle with Iran. Which is your preferred option? And speak to each of them if you could.
I think we should settle with Iran. Look, there's an American journalist arrested. She broke the law. She had confidential documents. She didn't have a press ID. She's an American. This is Sabiri. And it was Ahmadinejad who wrote a letter to the court and ultimately got her out. I mean, Ahmadinejad is crazy as he may sound to a lot of people, does want to settle with the United States. We have to listen to what he has to say. We have to listen to Khamenei, what he says, as well as the rest of that power circle around them. Otherwise, we're not going to know. We really have to look at Iranian actions as opposed to what the country we would like to see or the country we believe exists. And the way to do that is to settle with Iran. I think that ultimately Iran would like to be some sort of hegemon in the Gulf, have a predominance over security affairs, but not necessarily overthrow the regimes in that country or to go to the war with the United States. They had more opportunities in the last 5-6 years than they've ever had, and they didn't. They backed off. So again, we go by their actions rather than by what they say. You know, the Sunni-Shia conflict is the Mad Max approach to foreign policy. That's obviously not going to work. Yes, we could blow up their nuclear facilities, but what we would do is end up possibly provoking a very large war. But what we would really end up doing is strengthening this regime, Ahmadinejad and the Revolutionary Guard Corps, by a pinpoint strike like this, which is the last thing we want to do.
Let's hear from Queens, New York. Bernie is on the Democrats line. Hi, Bernie.
Good morning.
Morning.
Earlier on, you referred to a Russian invasion of Iran, and I'm racking my head. Could you tell us when this happened and what were the circumstances about the invasion?
The Russian troops came across the border right after World War II, and they had the Red Mullahs and the Mehrabad and the Kurds and the rest of it. It was a very small one, but it was the regime was collapsing at the time. They sort of seeped in, and you know, really our first nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union was over Iran. This is 46. That's when the Cold War started, was over Iran. It's something the Iranians never forgot, just as they never forgot the Mossadegh coup. And the fact that, you know, the Qajar dynasty was always subject to foreign, you know, trepidations. People were coming in, forcing them to do this, forcing them to give up Bahrain, for instance. And Iran is, in a sense, a very modern country, yet it's very xenophobic. It's had a very unfortunate history of being invaded for thousands of years, and it's in the Iranian soul that's always there.
One last call here from Joan, who is in Clyde, North Carolina, on the Independent line. Good morning, Joan.
Good morning. How are both of you?
Fine.
I want to thank C-SPAN. Please forgive me, I'm a little nervous. I would also like to thank Mr. Baer. I've been listening to you, I'm a political writer for about 20 years now in my own right, and I agree probably almost 98% of what you've been saying. I would like to thank the lady that called in about 3 or 4 calls ago talking about Russia and China versus the Middle East. And just like to make a quick comment, if I may. When Bush invaded Iraq and was asking for help, for backup, Russia said no, she could not do it because of her investments in Iraq. China also said no, she could not do it because of her investments. Therefore, the lady that called, if these two countries have investments in Iraq, they definitely are going to stand side by side to go against Israel. At least that's my opinion.
Appreciate your thoughts. Robert Baer, final thought on the future of Iran and its relationship with this country, the U.S.
I think we're going to find out in October or November. You know, they've ordered these bunker busters. They've sped them up. The administration has gone to Tel Aviv and says, we will settle this one way or another come this fall. I think you're going to see an enormous amount of pressure on this president to do something about Iran. Nuclear negotiations are going to probably reopen. How far they're going to go, I'm not sure, but it could go either way.
Robert Baer, former CIA operative for many years, author of the new book, The Devil We Know, dealing with the new Iranian superpower. He's out in Berkeley, California. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks much. It was great.